Welcome to the world of Mark's Money Mind, coming to you from the Rocky Mountain town of Crested Butte, Colorado. I'm your host, Mark Troutman, CFP. This educational, personal finance show combines money lessons, timely topics, personal stories, and community wisdom to help listeners and viewers master their finances to enjoy a stress-free life of financial freedom. In the previous two episodes, we discussed some of the tools you might find helpful in designing and managing your path to financial freedom and financial independence. I think it's very helpful to walk this journey with other like-minded people who help each other achieve these goals together. With that in mind, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about the importance of finding a community, or as I like to think of it, finding your tribe. So I wanted to share my story of finding the FI community to illustrate the benefit that I personally have received. In the spring of 2019, my wife had a lump removed from her arm, and it was found to be cancerous. And we were in Denver for her surgery. After the surgery, the surgeon mentioned that it would be good to have some preventative radiation treatment on her arm, and it would be a 7-week process every day, 5 days a week, 15 minutes in Denver. And we live approximately 4 to 5 hours from Denver. And we asked, when did you want this to start? And they said, as soon as possible. So we were scrambling. We needed a place to stay. We didn't have any relatives or even really friends in Denver at the time. And so we started looking on Airbnb, looking at hotels, and looking for options for where we could stay for 2 months while this treatment was being done. And our options were limited. They were very expensive. And we were thinking, well, how are we going to find a place to stay in such short order? I was in the Choose FI Denver group and Choose FI Colorado Springs group at the time. Those are the closest ones to me, Facebook groups. And I just thought, why don't I just post something out there and see if anyone has some ideas for us? The outpouring of responses was just amazing. We had people saying, stay in my house. I have an extra bedroom. We also had a camper at the time, and we even suggested if we could park it in your driveway and stay in the camper. The options that were provided to us from people who were total strangers, and my interaction with people on those Facebook groups was very limited. So it wasn't like I was a known person or anything like that. These were just people that were looking out for each other and offering anything they could do to help. And I'm even just getting choked up now. It was just a very emotional response. And one of the people that responded was Amberly Grant. And she said, I have just bought a duplex. I am going to be renting out one of the units as an Airbnb, but it's not ready yet. I literally just bought it. It needs furniture. It needs some work. But if you are up for it, it's yours if you need it. And we went and looked at it. It was perfect. It was less intrusive than being in someone's home. It would be our own 1-bedroom unit. It was in a great location for us to be able to commute back and forth to the treatments. We could actually ride our bike. It was on a bike path, so we would ride our bike to and from the treatments. As a result, she's become one of my best friends. And so that was my first experience with the financial independence community, and it was just an amazing experience. So everything seemed to be fine. She was doing a radiation treatment, and we decided to go to CampFI Rocky Mountain in July, which was right after her treatments were completed. And we went together. This was our first in-person financial independence event. I think we may have heard about it on those same Choose FI Facebook groups. I look back now at the picture, so there's always a group picture that's done, and I look at the faces in those pictures, and many of those people have become very good friends, and it's all from that first event. And I would also encourage you, if you go to an event like this and you do have a partner, bring them with you. So my wife was not as involved or interested in this at the outset, But as a result of going to that event and becoming friends with a whole bunch of people, she became much more involved going forward from that point in time. And I can't name everyone that's in the photo because it would just be a very long podcast going through all the friends I have from that event. But two of them that stand out are Becky and Stephen Heptig. We had some shared experiences and they have become extremely good friends. And you'll see as I kind of weave through my story, they are very involved in many aspects of our involvement in the community and adjunct groups that we have in essence formed since then. And Becky, as you may know, is one of the co-hosts of the Catching Up to Fi podcast. And so everything was fine. The surgery was fine. The radiation was fine. She was cleared. Everything was good, living her life together. And then on about a year later in the spring of 2020, and again, if you think about this, this is during COVID, right? Her cancer came back. She was just not feeling well. We went to our local hospital. They did an MRI and immediately rushed her to Denver for emergency brain surgery. I called Amberly and said, we need a place to stay tonight. And she was like, I'm not home, but you can stay at my house. We have a dog. She's like, bring your dog, do whatever you need to do. Getting choked up here. But it was, again, an outpouring of just what this community means to each other. It's not just about how do we figure out our finances together, but it's really like this very close family. Friend of mine, Kevin, who you'll hear about in a moment, views this community as just an extension of family. It's like everyone's a cousin. During that time, the brain surgery and the lung surgery and the cancer treatments, we were staying on and off at her place, and we got to know Amberly really well. And we would just have these conversations about finances sitting in her yard. She was working at home, so we had opportunities to have conversations together. And she was doing these Facebook Live videos, short videos about personal finance. So it's kind of funny. Here we are downstairs. She's upstairs doing these, and we're on there with a handful of other people. I think there might have been 6 or 7 people on there. The idea for FinTalks, which is a weekly Zoom meetup that we have, has been going on since that time, 4 years. I think she said she's only missed 4 weeks, and sometimes it was a co-host or another host during those weeks, but it's been going straight for 4 years now. And it emanated from those backyard conversations. A year after that, in 2021, was the first year that Amberly put on a FinTalks weekend, so an in-person event. So originally we were just meeting over Zoom. Some of the attendees said it would be great if we could get together in person. She decided, well, in conjunction with the CampFI Rocky Mountain in 2021, everyone can go to CampFI on one weekend and then the following weekend get together in Denver. And that was in July of 2021. My wife and I both planned to attend. Unfortunately, her health deteriorated rapidly at that point in time, and she actually passed away that weekend. We were not at the event. When you have major life events like that, you start thinking about how can we live our life to its fullest extent. And one of the things we decided to do for that weekend was get a suite in the Brown Palace. If you know Denver, it is one of these ornate old school hotels in the middle of the city. We had reserved using points. We couldn't cancel it. And so I just said to Amberly, hey, we have this suite. We can't use it. Feel free to use it. And I know she did because there were a whole bunch of people staying in her house because that's how the FinTalks weekend works. Everyone just kind of crashes all over the place. So I think she had a nice respite from the weekend and was able to use that reservation that we were unable to. Right after that, Amberly was asked to speak at a CampFI event Midwest in Minnesota in September. She had a pretty good idea of where I was at that point in time. It's obviously a very difficult time. And she said, you know, it would be really good if you thought about coming to that event. You'll be with friends. And I think she was also thinking it would be very supportive of her because this was a presentation she was going to need to give. And I certainly would want to support her in any way I could. And I said, yeah, I think I could do that. It was a tough time to really get out there because it was only a few months after my wife had passed away, after really 2 years of significant medical in and out of hospitals and so forth. It was a good call on her part to suggest I go there. And interestingly enough, so if you go to a CampFI on Friday night, typically you're sitting around in a circle and everyone's introducing themselves. The person that sat next to me, he had no clue who I was or what I was going through at the time. He was Jordan Grummett. And if you know Jordan, he is the host of the Earn and Invest podcast, also the author of the book Taking Stock, and he's also a hospice doctor. When it was my turn to explain who I was and why I was here, and of course I mentioned my wife had just passed away, I can't imagine a better person to be sitting there. He knew where I was coming from emotionally, having the experience he has with hospice patients. I think he had a pretty good understanding of my mental state and emotional state at that point in time. And I can't think of a better person to have been sitting next to me. And I got to know him very well that weekend. And I'm just very fortunate that our paths crossed at the time they did. And because that was an event that was so helpful for me, I decided to attend the next CampFI event, which was the next month in October of 2021. And this one was in California. I'm also a member of the Rock Retirement Club, which is a membership group that's associated with Roger Whitney's Retirement Answer Man podcast. And one of the coaches in that group is Kevin Sebesta. He also has a blog called Life and Fire. And he had reached out to me and said, hey, I'm going to that event. If you would like to stay at my house on the front end, fly in early, stay at my place, and we can get to know each other because we had met online, but not in person. And in the last episode, I think it was the last episode, I talked about the Fun Bucket. Well, that weekend was when the Fun Bucket idea was created. It was after a very long conversation late into the evening that the whole Fun Bucket concept came to fruition. So that was the first time I met Kevin, and we've become great friends. And this is funny because Kevin, Becky, Stephen, myself, and a handful of other people, we have a meetup group that we do on a monthly basis. There's about 8 or 9 of us, and where we have called ourselves the Slackers. And it's a long story, but if you want to hear the story about how the Slackers came to be and who the Slackers are and some conversations among us, I will link in the show notes the episode we recorded that was released on the Catching Up to FI podcast. It was like a bonus episode. There were 2 of them with the Slackers. So you can hear all about who the Slackers are and so forth. But Kevin's one of those, Becky, Steve, and myself, and a number of other people. At this CampFI Southwest, I met my very good friend for the first time, Amy Minkley. She reminded me in this conversation you're going to hear later in the podcast that I was the first person she met at that event. I think she was the first person I met at that event other than Kevin, who I drove to the event with. Obviously, I was in a, very significant life event stage at that point in time, and she was also going through some stuff, and we just had some really good, long, deep conversations. And it was, there were some financial discussions, but it was also about creating your life and how you want to move forward and so forth. And so I met her there. And Jordan was also at that event as well. And like I said, you sit in a circle, you sit in chairs, and I sat down and there were empty chairs, near me. And Jordan, in my opinion, made a point to sit right next to me. He just wanted to know how I was doing and how things were going. And again, it was just an example of how this community is so helpful. And it's not just about finances. It's about designing your life. It's about your identity, your purpose, and how you move forward. And the finances are just one little part of it. And that's just another example of how this community kind of supports each other. Later that month, I went to the Rock Retirement Group Roundup. So it's an annual event for the Rock Retirement Club members. It was in Fort Worth, Texas. And this is actually when the Slackers were formed. So there were a number of us on this walk. We were trying to walk to the stockyards, which theoretically should have been a short walk, but it was a very long walk. We got lost, but we got to know each other really well. And a number of people from that walk ultimately were the core people who formed the Slackers. And like I said, if you listen to those episodes that were on Catching Up to Fi, you'll hear that story. But so that's where that group of people was created. And then in 2022, I attended my first economy conference. I also went to 4 more CampFI events. I went to my first FinTalks weekend event that I attended. It was the second FinTalks weekend event, but my first. And you know what? It was so helpful to be surrounded by friends in the community because this was the anniversary of my wife's passing. And I can't think of a better place to be during that time. And that was so helpful. Again, this community is so supportive. And then in 2023, I attended my second economy conference, 4 more CampFIs. And this in 2023 was the inaugural Fi Freedom Retreat in Bali. And that event was created by Amy Minkley. So going back to that CampFI Southwest in 2021, where we met, and our paths have crossed many times thereafter at other CampFI events and other events. And she was very interested in forming a CampFI-like event in her home domicile of Bali. She lives there a good portion of the year and wanted to create an event there. Over that time, she had talked to myself and a number of other people about the idea, and we were all extremely supportive and suggested, yeah, go for it, create it. And she was nervous. Will people attend? It's a long way to go from many people. And we were like, we will support you in any way we can, and we will be there. You just tell us when it is, and we'll be there. And she sold out. She sold out that first event. And you'll hear about the one this year, which I will also be attending. And just a testament to how good that event was, how quickly it sold out. You'll hear that in the next conversation we have in the next segment of the show. And that brings us to the FinTalks cruise. The FinTalks events were previously in July, and this year Amberly decided, let's try a cruise, and let's do it in January. Her original hope was that she could get 10 rooms so we would have 20 people on the cruise, 2 people sharing a room. As word got out, and even when we were in Bali, we knew this event was happening. So a number of us who were there, many of the Slackers were there. And we said, hey, by the way, we're doing this cruise in January. And they were like, what? A cruise? And we're like, yeah, this cruise, we're doing it in January. It grew to about 65 people. So we had 65 people on the cruise. Obviously, Amberly was on the cruise. I was on the cruise. Kevin was on the cruise. Becky and Stephen were on the cruise. Amy was on the cruise. Stephen Baughier, who is the creator of CampFI, was on the cruise. And Amberly and I have both had the idea of creating a podcast. It was a thought in our mind at the time. And we decided, well, I have some podcast equipment. Let's just bring it along. We'll do some conversations and see how they go. So one of the conversations we recorded, I wanted to capture Amberly's take of the event as it was happening. And since Stephen was on the cruise and Amy was on the cruise, I wanted to have them all together and have a conversation about their events, how they were started, what they are, and how they helped each other effectively create these events together, and how important the community has been to all of us. So as the next segment of the show, you will hear that recording of the 4 of us. And the other thing we did is, since we had the microphones and we had it all set up, we asked people that were on the cruise if they would be willing to have a brief conversation. And so Amberly had a couple of questions that she wanted to ask for her new podcast that will be coming out soon. I had a question that I wanted to ask everyone. So at the end of the show, you will hear the responses to the question I asked each of those other participants who were willing to join us in a conversation on the cruise. So that's where the next 2 segments of this show were recorded back in January, somewhere between Mexico and Texas. So without further ado, let's get to the conversation with Amberly Grant, Amy Minkley, and Stephen Baughier. All right. So we are here on a Royal Caribbean ship at the very first inaugural FinTalks cruise. And as far as I'm aware, the only FI cruise that, is anyone aware of any other FI cruise? We started off in Galveston, Texas. We went down to Mexico. We had a couple of stops. We're on our way back now. So my question to you, Amberly, what possessed you to decide to have a cruise for the FI community, which kind of sounds like an anti-FI thing to do. And I think it started off small and kind of snowballed down the hill, correct?
100%, as most things do. So actually, first things first, I'm a yes gal. Like if someone says something, I'm like, okay, yes, let's do that. And so Eric Cooper, I was at CampFI, Rocky Mountain. I believe that's where it was. And he was, I think, maybe mentioning to Stephen or something, saying, hey, like we should do a cruise. And I heard that and I was like, ooh, what a great idea. So I had been doing in-person events for a while. They were really taxing because it's an entire 3 days, a bunch of people staying in my house. I'm running around getting food or getting it delivered, making sure people are showing up to their yoga and cider and coming in afterwards. And I find it a lot. And so when Eric had mentioned the word cruise, I love to say I am not a cruise person. Like, most people who are actually on this cruise, either it's their first cruise or they are not cruise people. And I thought, but this might make my job easier. We can get everyone together. Once we're on the ship, I am no longer the captain. We have like a captain of fun. We have an actual captain. I am now just be able to kind of hang out, which is partially true and partially not. So as someone who likes to just jump in and do something, I started reaching out to my friends who have been on 27 cruises a year for the past 2 years. And so I had a 1-hour meeting with them to say, hey, if I were to do this, what would I need to know? And specifically, the things you need to know are, what ship are you going on? What port? We wanted to make it accessible to everyone within 2.5 hours of a flight. So we thought Galveston. What type of cruise line? So all these questions getting answered. And we settled on Royal Caribbean Voyager out of Galveston in January. And then it went to starting to put the actual cruise together. I had to work with a travel agent and I had to give him a number. How many cabins should we reserve? And I can get my money back later, but how many cabins should we reserve in the beginning? So I thought, let's reserve 10 cabins. I know I can get 15 people guaranteed on this cruise. I might be able to get 20. We are on a 65-person cruise. So it definitely changed from the moment that I thought I could do something to literally 4 times as much. So that was really exciting.
Now, you said the idea was to go on a cruise line to make your life easier. Is it actually easier, or is there a lot more involved than you anticipated?
This being my very first cruise, I didn't know what I didn't know. And that's been a big learning curve. So I would say before the cruise, the things that I had to really figure out was all the questions that people were asking. But I was really lucky because one of the people who were coming on the cruise, and I actually chose the date so that that person could join us. He has been able to answer all the weird questions that everyone has that are completely normal questions, but I would never have been able to answer because I've never been on a cruise. So that was really helpful to have him, and now I can answer them in the future. The other thing is when you're putting on an event for the very first time, and I'm sure Amy and Stephen can speak to this, every email you write is new. So you're sitting there for hours composing the first email to make sure all the information that someone needs to know at this moment in time is encompassed in this email, and I'm not going to get 30 replies with additional questions. So that's one thing that made it more difficult on this time around. The other thing is that actually on the cruise, I thought I would be relaxing a lot more, but it turns out I'm not, because I did decide to have actual days where we have conference rooms. And within the conference rooms, we're having speakers, case studies. So people are sending me PowerPoints that I need to get up on the computer. I need to make sure that I'm reviewing case studies to understand what's going on there so I can answer questions, pull in other people to answer questions. So I find that those are tasks that I wasn't really anticipating doing, which I'd had to do for FinTalks weekend anyhow. So thankfully, I didn't have all the extra things of feeding people. The one thing I have found, though, is I get more relaxation and downtime than I did before, because I get to 8:30, I can go to bed because everyone's going dancing until 3 o'clock in the morning, but I can go to bed, and then I can wake up and have breakfast. And the last thing is, on FinTalks weekend, I don't get quality time with people. It literally is me running around with my head cut off the entire weekend. And that's the one thing I find is difficult. So here I've been able to say every mealtime, there's no phones, there's no nothing. I just get to sit down with new people, and I intentionally sit down with new people to have quality conversations with friends. And that to me is so much more lovely than, my other in-person events.
And great. I appreciate that. I wanted to capture this actually on the cruise because I think sometimes when you leave, maybe the history or the memories change quite a bit. So I think this is great that we're able to do this literally as we're cruising. So Amy has the 5 Freedom Retreats event in Bali, Indonesia, which I was fortunate to attend last year. And I am curious. So you have obviously a land-based event and an event that's literally halfway around the world for many of us, not all of us, because there were plenty of people from close by or closer by. But I'm curious, you've now just completed your first event. How was yours different in planning or logistically, especially when it's halfway around the world, than, let's say, kind of more of a, I don't want to say a prepackaged program, but semi-prepackaged program?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's great to be here with you guys. And I'm so pleased to share about my event and to take part in these other events, which have been so life-changing for me too. I think my event, because a lot of people hadn't traveled to Asia before, there was a lot more hand-holding and a lot of questions that were coming through, people who were nervous about traveling for the first time. And so I think there was we had a lot of Zoom calls before we came to Bali. There's a lot of information on the FAQs, but I feel like coming that far, people do need more support often. And then, because they were traveling so far, they also wanted to do a lot of things pre and post event. So I felt like I spent just as much time planning the pre-activities and the post-activities. And I think what Amberly did with the cruise is super smart. I think it makes a lot of sense. And as an organizer, I think, wow, I'm kind of envious that it seems like it's a little bit easier to organize versus having people come to Bali. But I do love showing people my home, and it's fun to have people come to Bali as well.
And the word is that the second event, which will be this fall, sold out in record time, as I recall. What was the story behind the ticket sales for the second year?
Right. I was so honored, and I was really surprised as well. It's hard to know, right? And I feel like, I can really relate to Amberly's story about, initially you're like nervous, you're booking seats, you're putting a deposit down on, she did on the cruise and I did on my hotel. My first year I had no idea what's the demand going to be. And then you don't really know, like, is the demand going to be there the second year? How are people going to, how receptive are people going to be? But I was really just so honored to see, it sold out in 2.5 hours. And I feel, I don't take it lightly that people are spending their time and their hard-earned money and getting, babysitter or asking grandparents or whatever it is to come all the way to Bali, taking time off work. And I'm so honored that they're coming, and a lot of them are coming and extending their trip so they can really spend time and, slow travel around the area as well.
Well, I think it's a testament to both of you that you obviously have a draw that people will want to come to an event so far away. And in your case, Amberly, have 65 people instead of the original maybe 20. And I can say, Amy, that you went over and above for your event. I mean, none of us expected all of the planning you did, especially beyond the event, afterwards, even beforehand, and so forth. So I think the reason you had such success with the ticket sales in year 2 is because of the excellent event that you put on last year. And I will be back again next year. But we have a third person here in the room, and that's Stephen Baughier, who is the founder of CampFI. And I will ask him in a moment how many CampFIs there have been. But I am curious. Well, let's just talk a little bit about what CampFI is. And then I have a few questions for Amberly and Amy about possible inspirations from CampFI for their events.
All right, I'll try to make it quick. CampFI is a weekend-long event where people just interested on their FI journey get together and meet in real life, in person. It was inspired just by the idea of the fact that the FI community, Financial Independence Retire Early community, was building online through blogs and podcasts, and there were a few opportunities for people to meet in person, but it wasn't as widespread as it is now. And this was back in 2016. So I attended a Camp Mustache. It was a great experience. So I did a retreat in January of 2017. It went over well. And since then, I changed. Camp Mustache still exists, but I changed. I rebranded mine from Camp Mustache Southeast to just CampFI and ran with it, and tried to make it accessible to as many regions domestically and land-based as possible. So yeah, that's sort of how the origin of CampFI started. But it's just usually it's a Friday to Monday retreat of 50 to 60 people who just want to get together and hang out. It's super informal.
And how many are we up to? And how many a year do you typically have?
We have 8 camps per year at 6 different locations. So we double up the Florida location and the Colorado Springs location. And we just, this past January, had our 43rd CampFI.
So when is number 50? Do you know which one that's going to be?
Yes.
Which one?
It's going to be on October 17th of this year, 2024. And it's going to be in Denton, Texas. And October 17th is also my birthday. So it's kind of a cool way it all lined up.
Nice. Very cool. So curious for you, Amy. I know we met at a CampFI in 2021, correct? Yes. So that's also what I think is really interesting is that we have 3 event producers here. And typically when I think of event producers in the same space, they're in essence competing with each other. So they're running their own event silos and they're hoping to get people to come to their event, almost like, well, I'd rather you come to my event than that event. But here we have 3 people that are at each other's event. And in many cases, I see all of you at each other's events. And I think that's unique to this community in that everyone helps each other. And so I'm very curious, Amy, as to what inspiration did you get from CampFI to do your event, for example, and any assistance you might have had from other members of the community?
Yes, definitely. I mean, yes, I was so inspired when I went to that very first CampFI when I met, you were actually the first person that I met there, Mark.
Oh, really?
On the Friday, 4:00, CampFI starts, and we met by the coffee machine. I remember it really clearly. That event lit me on fire. I was, fire literally, but I was so excited. I felt like I found my tribe. And I was so inspired by the quality of the people that I met. The speakers were phenomenal, but the conversations I had, at night, on the ropes course, when we're ziplining, just hanging around, in the evenings, it was so great around the pool during the day. So I left that weekend. I have a picture of it that I still, I've got as a screensaver where it just reminds me how happy I was to find my tribe, and I was telling Stephen on the bus yesterday when we were on our excursion about, he is the reason this community, I believe, exists. Because, Camp Mustache is amazing, and I went to Camp Mustache last year. I love it. But there's one event that sells in Seattle. The Seattle event sells out in seconds.
I heard 10 seconds this year.
Yes, it cannot meet the demand. And it's really Stephen's effort 8 times a year after year since 2016, creating a community who are passionate and who want to go to, I've been to, this is my 11th event, FI event, this one, the cruise, who want to go to 5 events a year, which is what I've got signed up for in 2024. I mean, we love community. So thankfully for Stephen for creating the community. And yes, I was inspired by him. He got on a Zoom call with me more than once to talk through things. Diana's been helpful. Amberly's been helpful. This community is so supportive. And I think our goal is, for me, I've been changed so much and I want to give that opportunity to other people. And, I'm hoping also, this year we'll have more Australians than we had last year. We've got Canadians and Brits coming to my camp. So I want to also give an opportunity to people on that side of the world who can't travel to a CampFI. And then I'm spreading the word about, I've got an Australian who's coming to CampFI in March with us. I spread the word to a guy in Thailand who's already booked the Virginia CampFI. So, I feel like the more people that we spread the word about all of our events, the more lives, can be impacted, because this incredible work. People are looking at not only their money, but like how do they want to design their life? It's important work. So I feel like it's all about the message and creating freedom and spaciousness in people's life. So it doesn't matter what event people go to. It's just giving people the opportunity.
And Amberly, how about you? Were you inspired by either of these other two individuals here? And what pieces of their events maybe did you use to help, make this a little easier for you to do than doing it literally from scratch?
Yeah. After I heard about Amy's Bali event, I was like, oh, I got to step this up. Because mine are a lot more casual. But actually, I was like, no. The first thing I do before, we'll let her have the really wonderful event that everyone talks about. Yeah. For like months afterwards. Mine are different, right? And that's the whole thing is we all have different people who come to our events. And the same people, obviously, look at this room, right? We have the different people. We have the same people who come. And the first thing I do before actually like putting down dates for my event is I literally look at the calendar and say, who's running an event near me? Because what I don't want to do is compete on the same weekend, although I compete with your second weekend with Rocky Mountain, but we'll talk about that in a second because it helps first weekend, but not anymore. But anyways, I always check a calendar to make sure, hey, am I too close to someone else's event so that I'm taking away from them or someone else's experience to go to theirs? Are people going to have to start choosing, which they are, right? Your dollars only go so far. So you're going to have to choose which events work for you.
Well, some of us do. Some
Correct.
of us go to all of them.
Yeah. This is the case for a fun bucket, right? Get to do whatever you want with it. So I always want to make sure that that there always are going to be some sort of overlap in time or people's money can't go everywhere. But it's really important to make sure that we're not on the same weekends or within, like a small amount of time. So that's one thing I do just to make sure that we're not competing. And I don't see it as competition whatsoever. Just like Amy saying, this is literally like we all have different ways of bringing FI to the world and experiences to people. And every person who goes to each event, like we talk to them, and they love them. And it doesn't matter which event. And people don't compare events. It's like CampFI is CampFI. Like Bali is Bali. The FI Freedom Retreat is like, that's that. FinTalks is something completely different. And my first CampFI, I think I was running a retreat the next weekend already. The first FinTalks was going on. No, because I was there. And maybe it was the weekend afterwards. I can't remember. But the same thing happened there where someone was like, we should do an in-person event. And I was like, great, let's do that. And I went to CampFI and I absolutely love the format of it. The downtime that you have for people to actually build community. When you're just in, back-to-back meetings all day long, it doesn't give you that time to stop and reflect off of other people. And so I really love that, one of the best things of CampFI really is the nighttime hangouts. And so I actually took a bit of that model for my own FinTalks weekend where I only had one day, one night of talks that I personally only have 10 minutes. People go over 10 minutes, but
A few people.
Yeah. I sit at the back, wrap it up, guys. But for me, it was only 10 minutes because even CampFI, it's like, it's full of information, but I actually don't want the speakers to be any part of the actual weekend for me. That's what I took away from CampFI is like, I think that's great, the way that you're doing it, but I want to do it different because I don't care about the speakers, and the speakers are within the community. So you don't come as a speaker, you come as a community member, and then you speak. And I only do 10 minutes as a source of inspiration for conversation later. And that's it. And so I really loved the CampFI model and then used a little bit of that to change it for my own.
And I think it's really interesting. That was the one thing I had a question about on a cruise ship with 4,000 people or whatever the passenger number is. It's somewhere in the high threes or something, right?
3,500.
3,500, right. It's amazing. Well, first of all, one of our participants made these necklaces that have our names on it. At first, I was like, yeah, it's kind of weird, but it's actually pretty cool. And people that are in your group, because I don't know all 65, but I know a good portion of them. But the cool thing is, there's a few places where we kind of congregate on occasion, and the promenade Cafe seems to be a very popular one. And the Windjammer, which is the buffet food area in the back, is another one. And it's literally like you can just go and find people all the time. And I'm always walking by people in the hallways and stuff. So I was amazed at how on a very large, 14-story ship, that you're constantly coming across people. Yet there's plenty of activities to do. Like earlier today, I just went on the climbing wall for 30 minutes. I was like, oh, there's another activity that you didn't have to arrange, but it's here for people to do. And there's plenty of activities that other people have done that I haven't done, obviously. So I just thought it was an interesting experiment, and I think it's been a very successful experiment. So I hope you decide to do it again. Just quickly, so this emanated from FinTalks. You want to tell us a little bit about the origin of the whole reason we're here, in essence?
Yeah. So in March of 2020, so 4 years ago now at this point, I have always wanted to do some sort of financial education for people. I've been reading finance books since I was 15. Wasn't really able to apply my knowledge until about 3 years before that, when I got a quote unquote real job. And the pandemic was starting. I was getting out of a 6.5-year relationship. I just spent $80,000 to rebuy my house. My Airbnb income went to zero. Basically, my life was falling apart before my eyes, and I had no idea what the heck I was going to do. And so I've always anchored in community. Like, it's been since I was a child, we always volunteered every single weekend for the Red Cross. Or my mom jokes that, I would walk around to the neighborhood's kids' parents, and I would get 25 cents from each. And then I would take all the kids to McDonald's, buy them all ice cream, let them play in the play place. I would sit down, wait, and then I'd walk them all home. Like, I've been doing this since I was a child. And so I figured, what's better than a pandemic? People might be hurting financially. They might be separated from loved ones. Let's just start educating. So I started doing, I did like 75 20-minute financial, informational tidbits 5 days a week for all of 2020. But and I did them live. So my first, 4, Mark joined with another person, Juan, my friend Emily and her husband, Austin, my friend Lacey. So I had maybe 4 people on there. And I remember it was Mark or Juan, one of the two of you guys was like, we should have a meetup, And so I thought, well, let's start a Zoom. So I replaced my Tuesday talk, my Tuesday live, with a Tuesday Zoom. And I have the first picture of it, which was Mark, Marge, Jason Yamnitz, who I'd met online and was a friend.
Who was also on the cruise.
Great fan now, has helped me with 3 of my houses. My 2 friends, Emily and Austin and Lacey, and we just started. I would choose a topic every single week. I'd send out an email with questions that I might want you to ponder before the conversation. And that's how FinTalks started. I was calling it FinZoom, but then, Doug from Mile High Fi was like, you're going to get sued one day from this for Zoom. So maybe we should change the name. And on Mile High Fi podcast, we changed it to FinTalks. And I've been doing that Tuesday call for 3.5 years straight. I missed 4 sessions total in the 3.5 years. So basically, it's just a financial conversation with, normal people. We give each other advice. I mean, thousands of dollars saved. And that's how FinTalks, the in-person events came to fruition, how the cruises come to fruition, and who knows where it will evolve to in the future. Now it is a paid subscription. So people pay a monthly subscription to come to 4 sessions a month. And it's the same thing. It's recorded. You get to go and look back on recordings, and you just really get to have a weekly conversation that most people can't have because it's a taboo topic.
So I do want to wrap this up and ask each of you if people want to find out more about your events, where they go. So why don't we start with the one that has had the most events, Stephen?
All right. You can check out the CampFI schedule at campfi.org at campfi.org.
And as I know, these tickets do sell out, so you definitely want to buy them when they're available, for sure. And Amy, how about you? I know it's a sold-out event, and I know people even on this ship, some of us have been calling it a boat. Apparently, boat is the incorrect term for this vessel. It is a ship. And I understand people are even hounding you to get on the list for next year. So if people want to find out more about your event, where do they go?
They can go to FIFreedomRetreats with an S.com. So FI, F-I, freedomretreats.com. And then they can go down to the footer and sign up for the mailing list because I anticipate it will sell out fast next year. I already have the dates for next year.
And when are those dates?
September 7th through 11th, 2025.
Mark your calendar. And Amberly, FinTalks.
Yep. AmberlyGrant.com. And you'll see in my header, there's a FinTalks cruise. So anything you need to sign up there, including my mailing list, is there.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. And I just think it's so amazing that we're all here on one person's event. And I know in the next events, I'll probably see many of you again. Mm-hmm. If any event planners are out there, don't be afraid to help each other out, because I think actually it's been extremely beneficial for each and every one of you in that there's this kind of cross-pollination among event planners. So thanks.
Love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In this last segment of the show, we're going to hear from some of our FinTalks shipmates. Keith, Chad, Scott, and Jay answer a question I posed to each one of them. Amberly and I were asking questions of participants, and you will hear Amberly introduce each guest, and I will pose a question to them, and we will hear their responses. So this is the community wisdom segment of the show.
Hi, Keith. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My question to you is, what is the best financial advice you've ever received, or let's say just most influential, if it doesn't have to be the best, and who was it from?
The best life advice I've ever gotten that also has influenced my finances and it's influenced everything in my life is the last W-2 job that I had. My boss told me even the dictionary has spelling errors. So it's not about getting things perfect. It's about just putting out what you have and then incrementally improving them. And those two words, incremental improvement, have guided everything that I've done in life. So when you're buying a house, doesn't have to be a home run. Just buy a house and get it cash flowing and then pay attention to it and tweak things as you go along to make it cash flow better. Or when I have a relationship, you don't have to have the best pickup line, but just keep incrementally improving how you interact with that person. And if you do something that upsets your partner, then find that out and try not to do whatever upsets them or discuss it, and just keep trying to incrementally improve how you have your relationship, how you invest. I've bought properties with 10% interest rates, and I've bought properties with 3% interest rates. And I keep trying to get a little bit better with each one, get them to cash flow a little bit better, have my relationships last a little bit longer, make other people happier, just keep trying to make things a little bit better. And that's made all the difference in my financial life and in my life in general.
And at what point in your life was that advice received?
He told me that in 2002, I think, or 2003.
So how old were you?
I was 29.
So in your 20s.
Yeah, so I was in my late 20s. The job that I had was, I was flying high. I felt like I could do no wrong. And I was developing courseware and curriculum for the company. And the problem they had with anybody that was developing curriculum is everybody was like, all right, I just need a little bit more time to work on this to make it perfect. And he would just drill it into our heads. No, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just get it out there. Let us teach from it. And as we're teaching from it, we'll learn, oh, there's this spelling error, or you said this wrong, or we need to fill in this other material. And it was a difference between succeeding, because you have to get in the game. You can't win the game that you're not playing. So it's just a matter of getting into the game, getting the ball rolling, and then making adjustments along the way. And it's been about 20 years since I got that advice, and it's steered my life in the right direction.
Wow, that's great.
Thanks for joining us, Keith.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Chad.
Hey, Amberly.
How are you doing today?
Wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Chad, my question to you is, what is the most influential financial advice you have ever received? And if you want to share from whom that was.
Yeah, so that'd be from my father. And there's a short story that goes along with this. And so I was going to school for my undergrad, which was for a business degree. And they had the stock ticker. running across the lobby when you walked into the building that hosted the classrooms every day. And I just see like everything's red like all the time. This is like 2008 financial crisis, And so I just said, Dad, do you know anything about investing? And he said, yeah, a little bit. I've been saving for my retirement, Roth for IRA, stuff like that. What do you want to know? And I said, well, is it a good time to put money in the market? And he said, yes, it is. It's pretty much like now is always the best time to put in the market. At that time specifically, he's like, it's half what it's ever been. Like, this is, yes, just go ahead. You can't go wrong now. But he's told me several stories where he had talked to people who were like, oh, the stock market is so overvalued right now. There's like, you should not invest. And then 10 years later, it's 4 times what it was when people were saying that. So just kind of that advice was just to get in the market, invest regularly, and not worry about whether it's a good time or a bad time, because 20 years from now, investing today will be a good time.
Your dad isn't J.L. Collins by any chance, is he?
No, but I have pretty much read just about every word that J.L. Collins wrote.
Well, it just sounds very similar because it's interesting because, normally during those times you ask probably 90% of the population and they're going to say, you shouldn't be in the market. You should sell. Look at what's happening. Look at all that red on the screen, right? So that was very sage advice. So I presume he was successful in his own right, having had that advice, I presume, for himself as well. Is that correct? So
yeah,
the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah. And so, he has lived and invested through several big market swings, like the dot-com bubble of like the early 2000s, I think, and maybe coming out of the high inflation era in the 80s, where he said, most of the money he's made from his investments were in a couple of those big boom periods and kind of sticking with the plan through the busts.
And how did you feel going through that period? So I presume that was your first kind of market decline. Have you had, we've all had some since then, but how has that felt for you, those prior declines? And have you changed in any way going through a few more of them over time?
Yeah. So that was actually the start of my investing. So I started a Roth IRA when the Dow was at like 6,000 and just set it up where it was an automatic investment of a few $100s every month or something like that. And so I never really thought about it much more than that. What I do think of, though, is it was really pleasant to watch it grow after that, because the market did turn around relatively quickly. During the other swings I've seen or thought I would see that did not materialize, the things I've learned is to try to not time the market. So like after the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, 2000, that era, I'm reading the news and they're talking about how horrible unemployment is. Like nobody has jobs, and I'm watching the market and it just keeps going up. And I'm reading about this double dip recession that's going to happen. And so I'm like, I'm not putting money in the market. I'm not putting money in the market. And we were saving for a house. And if I had put that money we were saving for the house in the market, it would have doubled in the time period I was saving for the house, instead of waiting for this double dip recession that never happened. And then with the COVID crash, I started thinking back to what like the Dow was at during the Great Recession. I was like, well, man, it went down to like 6,000, and it was at probably, I think, like what, 17, 18,000?
I don't recall the numbers.
Something
it was
like
a 50%.
Yeah, but 50% from almost 30,000. So in my mind, I'm thinking there's still a lot of room, because I've invested at 6,000 for the Dow, and it's at 18, and they're talking about putting the stimulus into the economy from the Fed, and the market's still dropping like a rock. Let's get into cash quick. And then like the next day, the market went up. Thankfully, there was some other stuff I'd sold before the big crash, so it kind of all worked out in the end. And it's kind of been like the biggest lesson I've had is to lose early, make the mistakes early in investing, and not worry about it. Just say, I'm glad I learned that lesson now when I'm playing with a few thousand or tens of thousands as opposed to millions. I don't want to make mistakes when I have millions that I'm making mistakes with.
Yeah. That's great wisdom. And I'm glad that was your experience, because starting off during like you said, with small amounts during a volatile time, you do learn from that, even though it was smaller dollar amounts and the fact that the volatility in the future doesn't make you want to get out. So I'm glad to hear that was such a successful experience for you, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for being on with us today, Chad.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Hi, Scott.
Hi, Amberly.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for
Appreciate it.
joining us.
And my question for you is, what is the most influential financial advice you have ever received, and who was it from?
Mark, I honestly can't tell you one piece of advice I've ever heard.
Well, let me hear a few then.
I'm saying it all like combines into like I have a lot of beliefs, but I don't know who they came from.
Mhm.
They're probably from like lots of
That's
sources.
okay. That's okay. You don't have, then that's fine.
Okay.
Any specific ideas, topics, what have you,
Absolutely.
and like maybe made you go down a different path, most likely a better path.
Yes.
Anything to that effect?
Got it. So the first thing that comes to mind is some of the books I've read. I read a lot of books by behavioral economists. I like Burton Malkiel, and so he was one of the first. He wrote one of the first finance books I read, Random Walk Down Wall Street.
Oh, that's a great book.
Yeah, really good book. And then I'm currently reading book Misbehaving by Richard Thaler, and I've read Nudge by him too. So people like them, I think that's probably all of the stuff they talk about is the best advice. So how people think and make decisions, so that and understanding like why I'm making decisions that I am, and making sure that they are, if they're not rational, then that I'm okay with that, and just understanding my thought and the people around me. That's been the most transformative. I guess I don't know if it's advice, but information or knowledge that I've gotten in my journey.
And would you say that's relatively recent, or are some of these things that made you maybe walk down a different path, were these earlier in life or were these later in life?
So I didn't know anything about investing before I started investing. Wealthfront, when they had just started out a few years into their journey, they had a blog. They started the blog, and it talked about how to invest scientifically, like index funds, like why the market moves as it does, and so that was my first foray into it, into investing and finance, and I like that they always came at things from a data-driven point of view, which is what I appreciate, what I understand and agree with, I guess, and so as I was deciding how to invest, that was the biggest thing. Then recently, I've been reading more. So I think the last 2 years, I've started reading finance books, and that's added a different layer because I already have my whole game plan set. I automate everything, and it's all set. So I just understanding things and getting a deeper understanding of everything has been recent.
And when was it age-wise, decades, teens, 20s, 30s, whatever? I don't even know your age, but probably a hell of a lot younger than I am. When you started investing and so forth and really getting deeper into this?
Started investing, I believe it was 2017 during my internship. I think I was early 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that these kind of major life points tend to happen in people's 20s.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's going to be a theme that I find as I probe and ask these questions.
Yeah. I think I like cutting off things, like as I approach new stages of life, I have new challenges or new goals, or things changed in priority as just like risk changes, over time. Those goals, I want to I grasp what I'm doing, and then I move on to the next big challenge. So it's like I think the 20s are for figuring out finance stuff.
I would agree. Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us, Scott.
Thank you, Amberly.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yay.
My question for you is, what is the most influential financial advice you have ever received? And if you want to share who that was from, your choice.
So I'm probably, this answer is probably very different from most people. I'm sure most people would say like, oh, from my parents or from a close friend or something. Mine is probably from the whole FIRE community. And the reason I say that is I had a plan that was wrong, but because I didn't know about any of this. And so my plan was wrong. But then once I heard about the FIRE community and the 4% rule and the Trinity studies and all those things, it gave validation to what I was doing, that, hey, I was maybe a little off with the math, but I wasn't far off with the idea. And that gave a ton of validation to what I was doing. And then I felt like, oh, that is the best thing ever, like to understand that this is a real thing. I'm not crazy. And that, there's a way to get out of this. So I was so happy that there was a foundation. And I know it's not so much a cool story to say that it was the FIRE movement, but I mean, probably, certainly the Shockingly Simple Math to Early Retirement from Mr. Money Mustache, and then J.L. Collins' Simple Path to Wealth. I mean, those are certainly great things. I also really, really enjoyed Quit Like a Millionaire by Christy Shannon and Bryce Long. So those were kind of the first things that I kind of went to, and those to me were very foundational.
And this was discovered later in life. Is that correct? So this wasn't something in your teens or 20s. This was a little bit further down the road. Right?
No. So, so I was in my mid 40s, mid to late 40s when I discovered this. So I was certainly a late starter in the game.
And prior to that, I'm presuming you were just kind of following the normal mantra, go to work, potentially save money, not save money. And then you just discovered this at a later time and were just kind of like, whoa, this is a totally different way to think about things. Is that correct?
Well, somewhat. I had myself 3 years previous to discovering the whole FIRE movement is when I had made my plan of I don't want to work forever. And I tried to make my own plan. But then when I actually found that there was already a movement that kind of had the same tenets, and that it was, just some math adjustments to it. To me, that was certainly reassuring and really helped me think, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. And I was so thankful for that information, because that just made me feel like, okay, one, not only have I found my tribe, right? And certainly that's why I participate in a lot of community-related events, related to FI. But it just really kind of gave me some needed assurance that other people are doing this. It's very possible. And then, it just helps me to kind of keep on that track, right? Because sometimes you like, well, I'm not even sure if my plan is working, right? But when you hear other people with these things planned out in the Trinity study that has done all the studies and these things, and that really helps and say, hey, yes, your reassurance. And that's really what, you would think that good advice comes from. Whoever that comes from is somebody patting you on the back saying, hey, you're doing okay, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jay, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to find your own tribe by maybe going to some of these events. You can pick one, whatever sounds appealing to you, or one of your local meetup groups. Choose FI has a lot of local meetup groups, and if there's one in your area, I would encourage you to check it out. They're really fun, and it's great to meet some local people who are walking the same path. Here in the Gunnison Valley of Colorado, we do not have one. And I was just out to lunch with a friend in the area, Lindsay, shout out to you. And we have talked about creating our own group here in the Gunnison Valley of Colorado. So if you're nearby or in the Gunnison Valley, shoot me an email, mark@marksmoneymind.com, and we'll get our own local group up and going. Thank you for listening to this week's show. Please click follow on your favorite podcast player or subscribe on YouTube to ensure you don't miss any future shows. Also, please leave a rating and review for the show. I still have a handful of swag packs to give out. So if you take a screenshot of your review and send it to me at mark@marksmoneymind.com, I'll send you out a swag pack if I still have them. And so if you get on it, you're likely to get one. If you would like me to answer a question on the show, please send it to mark@marksmoneymind.com and put podcast question in the subject line. Let me know your first name, or let me know if you would like to remain anonymous, and also your state of residence if you choose. I would also appreciate it if you would recommend this show to friends and family that might benefit from this content. See you next week on the Mark's Money Mind Show. Until then, make some, save and invest, live on the rest. And now for the all-important disclaimer. This show is for education and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered investment, tax, or legal advice. Please consult the appropriate advisor or advisors before implementing anything you hear on this show or any other show for that matter. While I fully intend for everything on this show to be true and accurate at the time of each recording, occasionally errors may occur. So please do your own due diligence on anything discussed.